Hello and welcome. This is VCD Roundtable, episode number 52. And today we are going to talk a bit about one of the mysteriums around HCX and Cloud Director. It always has been on and off the relationship. There were people saying it is possible. There were other people saying it's not possible. Toby spent the last couple of days a bit of time to actually look into that into a bit more detail. And later on, we are also going to discuss a bit about whether this is actually going to be the future of the discontinued VCDA, because VCDA was announced to no longer be there, but we will cover that in a minute. As Toby has prepared the topic, I'm going to first hand over to Matthias to say hi, and then he can throw the ball over to Toby.
Yeah, hi from my side. Today I'm looking forward to Toby convincing me to use HCX instead of VCDA. Hi, Toby.
Yes, thanks, Matthias. Yeah, hello also from my side. Welcome to episode 52. So first of all, let's talk about what is HCX. So HCX originating was a product by VMware, which has been introduced with VMware Cloud on AWS, and more has become, let's call it, the golden standard for migration scenarios. So originating HCX always had the capability to support our customers to migrate from your on-prem solution to a cloud-based solution. As Yves mentioned, there was sometimes already in the past where there was a kind of announcement, HCX is now supporting also Cloud Director, but if you really had to look into the limitations and what you need to do, it was more or less, let's call it, not really suitable or not really usable. But in the last couple of releases, more and more features has been introduced also to Cloud Director support. And now with the actual release of which is 4.11, as we are talking today, we have now really the support of Cloud Director. To be honest, as always, please have a look into the interoperability metrics. So please ensure that you are using the right version of HCX and also on Cloud Director side. And one of the biggest pitfalls when it comes to the installation of HCX is that you really need to have a look what kind of migration scenarios are supported. So HCX itself has a huge support of migration scenarios up to what we know from the past as physical to virtual migrations. So HCX itself has the capability of supporting us with a feature which is called OS assisted migration, so that we really can migrate a physical server or a third-party hypervisor VM to a vCenter. But this, for example, is not really something which is speaking as today possible on a Cloud Director environment. So the OS assisted migration, for example, is something which is not working in Cloud Director as today. But all other migration scenarios which are supported from HCX are supported. So what are the migration scenarios? So firsthand, that we have the typical called bulk migration, where we do an initial replication of our virtual machines from our source vCenter now into our organization VDC from a customer perspective. And then we can switch over the VMs from on-prem to our VCD-powered environment. So what more or less is also the feature what we have from a VCDA perspective. But there is some additional migration scenarios or some additional scenarios which are also quite nice in HCX. So for example, what HCX is capable of doing is a so-called layer 2 extension. So HCX can really stretch your on-prem network into your VCD environment, or also in the other direction, you call it, you name it. So we can also stretch the network from our Cloud Director environment to the on-prem location, and we can reallocate virtual machines. So we can really take a virtual machine and say, okay, virtual machine is currently running in my on-prem data center. It should be relocated to the Cloud Director environment, but also we need to stretch the network so we really can create a layer 2 extension where we then have the possibility to decide should the gateway already run in the Cloud Director environment or should the gateway run on the on-prem environment, so that we don't need to change any kind of routing upfront. And the more and more of virtual machines we migrate into the VCD environment, then we can also decide to switch kind of automatically the gateway. Why I'm talking about kind of, if we really have NSX also in our on-prem data center, we have the possibility to do it fully automatically, so that we really disconnect the gateway on the on-prem side and enable the gateway in the VCD environment. If we have the possibility to, if we don't have NSX on the on-prem side, we need to ensure that the gateway on the on-prem side goes offline, and then we can enable it on the VCD side. One of the biggest pitfalls when it comes to the installation is we know that since a couple of releases, Cloud Director is using MQTT as an internal message bus, but for the HCX integration, or to get HCX and Cloud Director working together, we still need RabbitMQ. So we need the MQT, which is something which concerns Matthias really nicely. So we still need an RMQ installation, and then we can integrate the HCX with Cloud Director. Please, 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 guys, have in mind, if you really plan to utilize HCX with your VCD environment, you always need to ensure that you connect your HCX to the Cloud Director, not to the underlying vCenter. This is an additional step in the configuration. So first of all, we need to connect to our Cloud Director environment. And then in the next step, he is asking us, hey, what vCenter are we going to use? What NSX instances are we going to use? Because this is something he's automatically discovering when you do the initial connect between your Cloud Director and your HCX instance. From what installation is needed, so from a provider perspective, we need to do the installation in our data center. So we need to install our HCX manager, connect our HCX manager to VCD, and then create all of the necessary profiles, so the compute profile, the network profile. And the same installation is needed on the customer side, but this time, and this is really a nice feature, the customer itself do not really need support from a service provider perspective, because he can do his own HCX installation and then connects his HCX installation to the provider managed HCX installation with his tenant admin. So at least our customer need to have one full tenant admin, and then can configure the whole migration for itself. So at the end, when we really talk about a self-service manner, or when we really have a look from a self-service manner perspective, HCX is a nice solution that the customer itself can really do all of the necessary steps and migration planning on its own, because he has his own HCX instance connected with his vCenter, and he can decide whenever he would like to do the migration, in which manner he would like to do the migration, if we go with a bulk, if we go with emotion assisted migration, whatever. If depends what kind of SLA a customer has internally, and what's needed there. But on the other hand, still, as mentioned, there are some kind of limitations still available, or still speaking today, which need to be ensured that we don't fall here in any kind of pitfalls, or that we don't run here in any kind of issues. So for example, one of my biggest concern currently is still only VDC network level is supported. So, for example, if you're already in the phase that you go with an data center group networking configuration in your VCD environment, or if the customer has already created a data center group because he would like to utilize, for example, the distributed firewall, this is currently not supported. So first of all, we need to do the migration. Then afterwards, we can, for example, switch to a data center group networking base, stuff like this. So there are still some kind of limitations available, or there's still some limitations on the market with HCX and Cloud Director. So please ensure that you really read the latest release notes, that you really have a look if HCX is a fitting product in your environment. But the good news still, after a couple of years, is now that we really have the support of HCX in our VCD environment. And what Yves already mentioned, let's see where the roadmap is pointing us, in which direction. We already know that VCDA is kind of deprecated, or has a deprecated announcement already received. But speaking as today, we don't have really a date, so we don't know when deprecation really will be there. But on the other hand, we have already kind of proper solution with HCX, and already also on the other hand, we have it fully included in our licenses. So when it comes to VCF licenses, always HCX is included in the base license. So this is no additional license, or there is no additional license needed, because HCX is part of the whole VCF licensing suite.
But when we look at it from that perspective, I mean, we get additional functionality because we finally now can do live migrations, which we couldn't do with VCDA before. We seem to have all the options from HCX. Yeah, certainly there are some networking limitations, but we also had some networking limitations with VCDA. The only thing which it kind of sounds like it's clearly more effort to do that than VCDA. Because VCDA, I mean, in reality was kind of like, not a foolproof solution to implement. There were still enough pitfalls to run into. Matthias is looking very angry at me now. As long as you can deal with certificates, and Matthias, you are our expert for certificates, it's actually almost a pretty safe solution from that perspective. But coming back to the question, so did you ever do a VCDA implementation, Toby? And how would you value it? Is it like 2 times, 5 times, 10 times as much effort?
I would say the initial effort is currently, would say, a little bit higher, because as the most fighting story at the beginning, as always, was, okay, can you please read the release notes? Then you would figure out immediately, hey, you need to have a RabbitMQ installation. Then figure out the proper solution, how I get quickly up and running in RabbitMQ, because my Kubernetes is currently not working. So then let's go to and utilize an Ubuntu. Let's install Rabbit. Let's configure SSL in Rabbit and stuff like this. But at the end, still we know, and Matthias is someone who is still often using it, or kind of using it. Still, we know that the messaging bus, or the MQTT in VCD, is more or less bulletproof, but has also some limitation. It is only an internal message bus. It is not really an external one. Correct me if I'm wrong, Matthias. So it's at least if you really need to utilize an external message bus, you still stuck with RabbitMQ. And what is also quite nice is, and this is but more on the day 2 operational perspective. From a service provider perspective, I would say it is much easier from the configuration point of view, because you only do the configuration once, and then all of your tenants can utilize it, can configure it on their own. You don't need to really care about it anymore, because all of the necessary appliances then gets automatically deployed. which is, from my perspective, much easier than from an VCDA perspective, because in VCDA we know we need to have proper signed certificates. We need to ensure that all of the connectivity is done from VCDA perspective. HCX deploys kind of its own fake ESXIs, where all of the migration stuff is happening, which is called, at the end, it is not a fake ESXi, it is the HCX appliance, the IX, and the network extender, the NX appliance, but at the end, this kind of ESXi code. And all of the necessary story is done. So this is where I would say in the day 2 perspective, it is much easier. In the day 1, I would say, let's say, yeah, 1.5 of the time with the HCX installation than you need for the VCDA installation.
Matthias, what's your thoughts?
I think it's it's all about what you expect, because we have advantages and disadvantages on both sides, aside any possible deprecation. But so what's pretty cool is the layer 2 VPN feature within HCX, enabling live migration and network connectivity and stuff like this. On the other hand, the big advantage I see with VCDA is the single pane of management. So you have only one user interface. So within Cloud Director, you have to plug in, and you can enable it on a per tenant base as an admin, and you just say, right, tenant A, B, and Z, they have a VCDA, and tenant D might not, whatever. So from that perspective, VCDA is really great. But as said, no live migration, no layer 2 VPN implicitly. So if you need a network connectivity, you need to build it manually. So that's always possible if you have. So there's even the I think standalone edge is the name.
Yeah.
Or no, autonomous edge.
Autonomous edge. Yeah.
Autonomous edge to establish a layer 2 VPN tunnel to a custom on-prem data center. So that's still possible. So it's a pro and a con. So I think the biggest advantage of VCDA is still a single UI, or integrated UI.
And speaking of UI, thanks for that, Matthias. Also, please be aware, this is independent if you're talking about VCD right now, but please be aware that HCX now really has gotten his own dedicated UI. So for those who have maybe played around with HCX already in the past, normally HCX was always integrated into your vCenter. So you go to your vCenter, select HCX. It is still there, but as soon as you select HCX in your vCenter, you get a yellow warning message telling you, hey, all of the new cool features are now in the dedicated HCX UI. So you really need to connect to the dedicated HCX UI to utilize all of the new features. So which is also kind of interesting to see that the embedded solution or the integrated solution of HCX with the vCenter is phasing out, so that HCX really become a standalone product, which could be, from my perspective, and quite an indication that we will also get back what many of us knows as vCenter converter, also in an HCX manner, because as mentioned in the introduction or in the beginning, HCX has also the capability of an OS assisted migration, so that you really can migrate on OS level side, but not with VCD, speaking of today, but that we really now also see on the on-prem side. It is dedicated UI where we have our HCX story up and running.
And I mean, it's important if they get the OS level version running. That would be important for Broadcom also to provide a feature set for every customer who switched off from the ESX hypervisor to a different platform, to actually get them back into the VMware ecosystem. So I think Broadcom will have a huge interest to get these feature sets back into the product and make them available on all the different platforms, because that is their door opener to make this work. I would clearly also say it's like I'm not expecting a lot of that to come back to VCD. However, I was actually surprised that this now finally seems to be perfectly well running with VCD. As you said earlier in our preparations, it's like we haven't honestly tested it for a while, so it could be that it was actually working already for a longer period. But no one ever complained when we said it's not working. Or maybe just everybody expected if we say it's not working, it's really not working. Could also be the case. I have no clue. But I think overall, I think it's a very important part to speak about this, that we have that alternate solution, that service providers can now offer live migration, which is important because that has always been kind of the discussion about, hey, why does VMC have this offer and we don't get anything like this? This is putting us on a disadvantage. It also is a potential solution for VMC because as AWS is ramping up the new VMware clouds on their end, they also need to find a migration path from the current VMC stack to the new platform, because that is not actually going to be Broadcom's problems anymore. So there are multiple good reasons why this makes sense, not only with VCD, but anything else. So, and as you mentioned, it is now included in every license. So in every VCF license, let's correct that. VCF license, there is still VDF in the other pieces. We only speak about the service provider pieces, but it is a good solution to move things from A to B. And it brings back RabbitMQ.
Yeah. And speaking of VMC or AVS or GCVE, so all of the hyperscalers, to be honest, this could also be a possible solution that you migrate your customer back into your VCD empowered environment, or that you really get now the capability of migrating a customer which is running already on Azure VMware solution, on Google Cloud VMware Engine, or on VMC back into your environment, because at the end you get the HCX on both sides, so you can also do a migration from a hyperscaler back to your VC, from your customer can do the migration back to your VCD environment.
Good. Anything else we didn't cover on this topic?
No.
Good. Just a quick, let's say, heads up for all the CSPs out there. Broadcom is not finished with all their changes and things like that. We just got an announcement this morning that the overcommits are going to be restricted moving forward. So there is a multi-step process. I'm not sure if everybody got the same email, so I'm not actually blurting out the numbers yet. I'm still in validation on how this works, also whether this is overall or per contract or whatever else. There are still a lot of questions to be answered. Hopefully we get these questions answered this week, so that early next week we are going to post our version or our comment on that. This is going to also be quite interesting for some CSPs, because we know at least a good amount of CSPs in certain countries who have actually gotten special pricing on overcommit, which are actually going to still have the special pricing now, but just not that many licenses anymore, so that's going to be interesting. And some other changes are coming as well. Also expect what I heard, there will be far more clear license guides for CSPs coming out. I'm not sure when exactly that is going to be coming, but as we said several times in the past, misbehavior from the past from some CSPs could now actually restrict all CSPs. We are trying to put our comments in for all the changes they are doing currently, on which ones we think make sense for the industries and which ones are challenging, but expect more news to come from Broadcom in the next couple of days, weeks. The other news, we have challenge days coming up in Stockholm in in 1.5 weeks on the 5th and 6th of May. We have then the first challenge days, which we are and architecture think tank in the US. We moved from central to US to Palo Alto. We most likely will host this in the VMware headquarters, as we are nearly around the VCF9 release, and we will get some support from some lead architects from Broadcom and others to join for some of the sessions. So challenge days and architecture think tank will be actually getting some additional input there. Therefore, the event on the, let me quickly switch the calendar here. So the events on the 2nd and 3rd will be challenge days. 4th and 5th of June is going to be the architecture think tank, are going to be in Palo Alto. We don't know yet if it's going to be on the VMware campus or in a hotel, but we will definitely get some support from Broadcom from a networking perspective. So even for European service providers, it might make sense to show up there, because this is your chance to meet with some people from the different views and others. At least that was promised from Broadcom, that they are going to give us some people for some networking events, etc. around that. So that is that. And then on the 17th and 18th of June, we are going to be back in Dubai for challenge days, and then we are heading into a summer break for challenge days and architecture. So if you want to actually get to know any one of these, then feel free to ping me or anyone else from the team so that we can hook you up for any of these events. Good. That being said, that was more or less my closing word. I'm looking forward that we have HCX now available for VCD. Matthias, first you, and then Toby, as he prepared today's session, can have the final say.
Yeah, I'm having a quiet session today. No, thanks for joining in. I'm looking forward to play around with HCX and compare it to VCDA myself. Will be interesting, and see which products and cases we can, or use case we can come up with to support our CSPs and their tenants to migrate workloads around. Toby.
Yeah, thanks, Matthias. Thanks for the summarization, because this is also what my thought is. We really need now, or we now have the better opportunity to really look in the customer needs. So as Yves mentioned, if we really have needs for live migrations, then we can think about it now. If other hand, we can still, as long as VCDA is there, never change a running system. But now we really have the support for HCX integrated with VCD. So we have a proper solution for all use cases. Thanks for tuning in, guys.